Okay, we've already gone through the importance of actually drafting a quarterback not too early in your drafts this year, but actually drafting one in years past, back in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. The plan was you go into your fantasy football draft, take a guy in the last round that has a good week one matchup and stream the position. Well, that strategy is now dead in fantasy football because these quarterbacks have access to ceilings that we have never seen before because you're getting those guys that can run the ball and also throw for almost 300 passing yards per game. So I'm going to be excited to dive into a position that now matters way more than it has ever done before. Excited to rank these quarterbacks, but before you get into it, please go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you play fantasy football and you want some real quality information, go pull up our 2022 fantasy football draft guide on flockfantasy.com. And before the season starts, anything on flockfantasy.com will be exclusive at a discount with promo code FLOCK. So make sure you go take advantage of that. But let's dive into this. Let's lead it off with everyone's quarterback one in his own tier. Let's look at Josh Allen. Now, there's not going to be too much to discuss here with Josh Allen. I will bring up the fact that he averaged almost 45 rushing yards per game. Josh Allen averaged over 40 rushing yards per game last year. That's the number one thing to start off with. This is what we were talking about with quarterbacks in today's age having access to a ceiling that's never been seen. You look at Josh Allen as a quarterback that had almost 260 passing yards per game, where in years past, the quarterback one, think way back in the day, like 2011, where zero quarterback, late round QB, it was really coming the number one strategy in fantasy football. The top quarterback option you would find, hell's Tom Brady. Tom Brady could get to 300 passing yards per game. Drew Brees could get to 300 passing yards per game, but they would provide you zero rushing yards. In today's age, Josh Allen with those, say, 45 rushing yards per game, if I get out a simple calculator real quick, 45 rushing yards per game is obviously equal to 4.5 fantasy points. And if we convert that over to passing yards, that's 112 passing yards per game. We add that on to what he had as a passer last year. You're looking at Josh Allen as a quarterback about 372 passing yards with fantasy points just off of passing alone. This is why grabbing those elite level quarterbacks matters so much. If we go through and look at the year 2000 onward, the only quarterbacks to have ever gotten to 250 passing yards per game and 40 rushing yards per game in a season, Michael Vick did it twice. Of course, we remember the elite Michael Vick fantasy football seasons. And then you had Cam Newton back in 2011, prime Cam Newton, and Josh Allen this past year. You have no Emmanuel Sanders. You have no Cole Beasley, but I think you can see Gabriel Davis and Jamison Crowder go in there and play those same exact roles. The only real concern I would say with Josh Allen you have is obviously Brian Daboll, their offensive coordinator, going over to New York. That is something that I need to point out, but beyond that, wheels up for Josh Allen. This is looking like a perfect situation. And now let's drop it down to our tier 2. And if you're drafting over there on Underdog Fantasy, really anywhere that has quality real money fantasy football drafts, you are going to have Justin Herbert as the second quarterback off the board in your drafts this year. You're going to have Justin Herbert about a round after Josh Allen. Josh Allen should go in about the middle of the third. Justin Herbert should go about in the middle of the fourth. I'm not going there. Despite losing Tyreek Hill, despite losing Byron Pringle, despite losing Demarcus Robinson, despite losing his 3 NFL starting wide receivers, we're ranking Patrick Mahomes at number 2. I'm sorry to do it. On Underdog Fantasy, Patrick Mahomes has been falling to the 5th round of drafts. We're getting Patrick Mahomes sometimes at the end of the 5th. And Mahomes, when it's all said and done, if he keeps falling like this, he may be my most drafted player over there on Underdog Fantasy this season. And if you're not drafting on Underdog Fantasy, go fix your life. Go sign up for Underdog Fantasy today. Hop in some real money fantasy football drafts. Have some fun drafting. When you sign up for Underdog Fantasy and use promo code FLOCK, they will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100 with promo code FLOCK. So it's free and you get our 2022 fantasy football draft guide, almost 300 pages of very high quality information with a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy. Go have some fun, go sign up. But the reason I'm going to have Patrick Mahomes here as our quarterback 2, kicking it off, is the consistency we've seen throughout his entire NFL career. Combine this with the fact that you have a vastly improved defense for the Los Angeles Chargers, where maybe they don't have to throw the ball as often. We'll get to Herbert in a second. And you have a fantastic division. Devontae Adams comes over here. You have Russell Wilson going to Denver. I think the Kansas City Chiefs may be forced to throw the ball over and over and over again. And while, yes, I would assume Marquez Valdes-Scantling actually slides into that Tyreek Hill role, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a massive downgrade on Tyreek Hill. Juju Smith-Schuster is an upgrade as wide receiver 2. Sky Moore is an upgrade as wide receiver 3. So I think the depth at the wide receiver position looking a little bit better for Mahomes. Also, if you look at PFF right now is pretty happy with the offensive line grade for Kansas City. So I'm sorry, Mahomes, if we go through and look at quarterbacks to average 10 rushing yards per game, 280 passing yards per game, and have an adjusted yards per pass attempt of 8.6 since the year 2000, you've had Patrick Mahomes do it 3 times, and the only other quarterback to ever do it, Deshaun Watson in 2020. Mahomes is putting up some of the most impressive quarterback seasons of all time in fantasy. I'm going to take notice when he's done it with this kind of consistency. We are going to have Mahomes at 2. And then Justin Herbert will be our quarterback 3. Like I said, most people watching this video are going to have Justin Herbert as their quarterback 2. He will be off the board before Mahomes in your fantasy draft. And here with Herbert, he was the number 2 quarterback in fantasy last year as a second-year player. He averaged almost 300 passing yards per game. I mean, through his first 2 years in the NFL, Justin Herbert's averaged 292 passing yards per game. He's elite. If we look at quarterbacks that average 15 rushing yards per game and 280 passing yards per game through the first 2 seasons of their NFL career, you have Justin Herbert doing it twice, and then Patrick Mahomes, his first year starting. So Herbert is on an elite trajectory. I will be the first person to admit it. But like I said, if you look at their pass to run ratio in game neutral environments, it was sitting at 62% last year. They also pushed the pace of play heavily. They were second in the NFL in pace of play in game neutral environments. But this is a team that adds in Khalil Mack. This is a team that adds in Sebastian Joseph Day. They add in a ton of key defensive players to their roster this offseason. So I'm sitting here just saying we don't have as large of a sample size on Justin Herbert being that elite level quarterback like we do with Patrick Mahomes. Possibly this team plays better defense where they don't have to throw the ball as aggressively and as often as they did last season. So we'll have Herbert at 3, okay? And Lamar Jackson going to be in the same tier at 4. Now, with Lamar Jackson, it is concerning that we've seen his adjusted yards per pass attempt fall every single season over the past 3. It's concerning that we've seen his rushing yards per game fall every single season over the past 3. Hell, that's why Lamar Jackson is at quarterback 4, not quarterback 1 overall, because if he was able to keep up what he did in 2019, we've talked about this before multiple times, but it's because it's incredible. He was the number 1 quarterback of all time in fantasy football, better than Peyton Manning in 2013, where Peyton Manning had 5,500 passing yards and 55 passing touchdowns. Lamar Jackson that season, 80 rushing yards per game. Now, I know we just did this earlier on, but let's go through and let's pull up Lamar Jackson's 2019 season, because this is going to be very important for the rest of this video, and look at how important rushing statistics are for quarterbacks in today's age in the NFL. Just wait till we get to Jalen Hurts. But with Lamar Jackson in 2019, this is a quarterback that ran the ball more than a lot of running backs. If we look at the fact that he had 1,200 rushing yards, and we convert that over to passing yards in terms of equal fantasy points, he added on an additional 3,000 passing yards with his rushing yards. 1,200 rushing yards equals 3,000 passing yards in fantasy football. Throw on the fact that those 7 rushing touchdowns, when you get 6 points per rushing touchdown, and convert that over to passing touchdowns, it's an additional 10.5 passing touchdowns to his statistics. That is why rushing quarterbacks have access to a ceiling that pocket passers just can't come close to. Lamar Jackson put up the best quarterback season of all time in fantasy football with 208 passing yards per game. We're going to have him here as our quarterback 4. I am concerned about Hollywood Brown leaving over to Arizona. Now let's drop it down a tier. Let's go over to someone else that I want to get excited about because of that rushing production. Let's look at Jalen Hurts. Now with Jalen Hurts sitting there at 52 rushing yards per game. Okay, so not exactly Lamar Jackson in 2019, but you get the idea. Pretty damn close. And with Jalen Hurts, what held him back this past year, besides the lack of passing volume, of course, only 209 passing yards per game isn't going to be elite by any means, but he was the quarterback 6 on a points per game basis. Jalen Hurts only had 6 games. Let me repeat this. Jalen Hurts only had 6 games with over 200 passing yards this past season, and he had 9 games with less than 200. Yet he was the quarterback 6 on a points per game basis, and it can get better because his touchdown rate this past season, 3.7%. Touchdown rate is by far and away the most volatile statistic in fantasy football. It's going to be a little bit more sticky with quarterback than it will be other positions, but still, we can assume that this touchdown rate comes up for Jalen Hurts. And not saying it's going to get to the 9% touchdown rate we had from Lamar Jackson in 2019, but if that goes to just be league average, and you throw on A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles, and Devontae Smith's going into year 2, and Jalen Hurts has the best offensive line in the NFL, it's like you already have this little kindling of fire with Jalen Hurts, right? He was already the quarterback 6 last year, and you get a couple gallons of gasoline, right? The first gallon of gasoline is that touchdown rate. We assume the touchdown rate's going to come up, so you dump that on there, and you already see that fire begin to build. I mean, it is going freaking sky high. And then while that fire is raging, Jalen Hurts already could be a top 3 quarterback just with positive touchdown rate regression. Then you grab another gallon of gasoline with the offensive line getting better, being the best offensive line in the NFL. You throw that on there. You're like, oh my God, can this fire get any bigger? Then you go trade for A.J. Brown. Then you go trade for a wide receiver that is right next to Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams over the past 3 years in yards per route run. Jalen Hurts is going to be one of my most drafted quarterbacks in fantasy this year. I will have him as our QB5, but going to this same tier right next to Jalen Hurts, we will have Colin Murray in here as our quarterback 6. Kyler is playing in an offense where Cliff Kingsbury, not a great NFL coach. We can all agree, but Cliff Kingsbury acts like he's a 12-year-old on Madden. If you look at the seconds per snap over the past 3 years in game-neutral environments, this is from RotoViz, you have Arizona second in the NFL in pace of play. The number 1 team, Dallas, who just led the NFL in points scored last year. The number 3 team, Buffalo. The number 4 team, Tampa. The number 5 team, the Chargers. The number 6 team, Kansas City. If we look at their pass to run ratio, you have Arizona sitting at 57%. They're throwing the ball aggressively as well. So you're looking at an offense that wants to be played like a video game. You're looking at Colin Murray as a quarterback that had 6.6 adjusted yards per pass attempt his rookie year. That gets better to 7.1. Then going into year 3, that gets better to 7.9. We can look at the same thing with his passing yards per game. It goes from 232 to 248 to 270. Now the rushing touchdowns came down this past year. But I can tell you this, James Conner's not going to score 1.2 touchdowns per game this upcoming season. Wheels up for Colin Murray. Now let's move down to our quarterback 7. This is going to be someone in his own tier by himself. Let's look at Joe Burrow here. With Joe Burrow as our quarterback 7, he led the NFL in adjusted yards per pass attempt last season. So we would assume that maybe this comes down ever so slightly, but no. With Joe Burrow here, going into his second full season as the starting quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals, where he has Jamar Chase going into year 2. T. Higgins is 23 years old. And most importantly, Joe Burrow has the best offensive line upgrade in the entire NFL with La'el Collins, Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, and Hayden Hurst all being added into the situation. I mean, you have PFF looking at the Cincinnati Bengals as a top 10 offensive line this year, despite Cincinnati last season leading the NFL in sacks allowed. So if I'm looking at this Cincinnati Bengals situation, I think the one thing that held them back were the overall plays run per game. Their pace of play last season, not great, but I've said this all offseason. I think this is one of the offenses we can expect to have that jump in pace of play because the improvement with their offensive line. Now, I am no head coach. If I was a head coach, the team would go 0-17 like that. I mean, it would be ugly. But if I was a head coach, if I had a quarterback coming off a significant injury that was leading the NFL in sacks, what I would do is I would slow down that pace of play. I would limit the overall plays being run in that offense and I'd be trying to protect our QB. If that's not a concern anymore, I think you could see wheels up in Cincinnati. I think that they could go absolutely crazy. Like I said, Joe Burrow led the NFL in adjusted yards per pass attempt last season. Those pass attempts go up. Very possible that you have Joe Burrow leading the NFL in passing yards. Now let's go over to our next tier of quarterbacks. Let's go down to QB 8. Let's look at Russell Wilson. Now with Russell Wilson, I have not drafted too much of him over there on Underdog Fantasy because he is going in a range where I'm usually not comfortable. I usually don't draft Courtland Sutton round 3. Don't draft Jerry Jeudy round 4. So I'm not a big Russell Wilson guy. However, I have to admit, I could easily be making a massive mistake. Now with Wilson, based on what we saw last year, he looks like a pocket passing quarterback. And it would 100% make sense to look at Russell Wilson going into his age 34 season and say, oh, okay, yeah, Russell Wilson is no longer going to run the ball. Russell Wilson's like Matthew Stafford. He's just going to be someone you're relying on passing volume. You're hoping the passing touchdowns are going to be there. But if we just go back to 2020, Russell Wilson did average 32 rushing yards per game. If Russell Wilson were to go back to that 2020 season, if he were to get back to 32 rushing yards per game in a Denver Broncos offense that has Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler, Courtland Sutton, in that order, Albert O, Greg Dulcich, Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon, a much improved offensive line compared to the Seattle Seahawks. PFF has the Seattle Seahawks as the worst offensive line in the NFL this season. You're looking at Russell Wilson as a quarterback that, similar to Burrow, has it as a possibility to lead the NFL in passing. I am ranking Russell Wilson here, assuming that he doesn't have the same rushing upside as someone like Colin Murray. But if he could get back to 32 rushing yards per game, he could absolutely bury me for not drafting him. Now our next quarterback 9, someone that I've tweeted it out before. We've talked about him for years now. Nobody's higher on him than I am. I know there are a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon now. Don't know where y'all were last year when I was fighting the Justin Fields truthers over this guy. But Trey Lance. Here with Trey Lance, he checks every box we look for. He is a quarterback stepping into a wonderful situation. You have a good offensive line in San Francisco. More importantly, you have arguably one of the best tight ends in the NFL with George Kittle averaging over 3 yards per route run over the past 3 years. You have Deebo Samuel. You have Brandon Ayuk. You have Elijah Mitchell, and you have Kyle Shanahan. So you have a perfect situation in here for Trey Lance. If he was ever going to succeed, it would be here. Then you throw in the fact that Trey Lance may have as much rushing upside as someone like Jalen Hurts. Trey Lance had 1,100 rushing yards his second year at North Dakota State, really his only year starting. And in that season, Trey Lance had 14 rushing touchdowns. The man is a monster. The man is a big-bodied quarterback. It is entirely possible he's able to get to double-digit rushing touchdowns. He's able to average, say, a similar mark to Jalen Hurts with rushing yards per game. Last year, Jalen Hurts, despite, like we said, only having 6 games with more than 200 passing yards, still managed to be the quarterback 6 in fantasy with 52 rushing yards per game. If Trey Lance can get there in a perfect situation, I don't see how he's not a top 10 quarterback this year. And what I need from everybody who's been watching this channel for a long time, I need you to go to the comment section because now it seems so easy. Now everybody's on board. But last year I was battling out the trolls. Please go to the comment section and go, Mason, I'm so sorry for ever calling you stupid to tell me that Trey Lance is in a tier way ahead of Justin Fields. That Justin Fields should not be drafted over Trey Lance in Dynasty. Please, everybody go to the comment section. Let me know that. All right. Well, let's go over to our next QB. Let's go to Dak Prescott at 10. With Dak, the Cowboys led the NFL in points scored last year. Now, I understand his situation's getting worse. You have no Amari Cooper. You also have no Cedric Wilson. You have Michael Gallup going to miss the beginning portion of the season. So your weapons aren't necessarily what they have been over the past few seasons. And also, looks like you're not going to run. I know a lot of people want to blame it on the ankle, but Dak Prescott had less than 10 rushing yards per game last year, sitting down there at 9.1. But going back to pace of play, the Dallas Cowboys have been number 1 in the NFL. Since you had Kellen Moore take over, the Dallas Cowboys, number 1 in the NFL in pace of play. In game neutral environments, they're also throwing the ball like crazy with 58% of their plays as pass attempts. So I'm going to take Dak Prescott here, someone that's averaged over 300 passing yards per game over the past 3 seasons. Another option very similar to Burrow. Could lead the NFL in passing. Can't rank him where you have Burrow, though, because obviously Burrow is a much better supporting cast. But now, speaking of supporting cast, let's go to a quarterback that I'm expecting to have a major downgrade in his supporting cast. Let's look at Tom Brady. Now, when we initially released our draft guide, I had Tom Brady as our quarterback 9. I've had to move down Tom Brady to quarterback 11. Sounds like Gronk's not coming back. I'm sorry. Sounds like Gronk is just completely done. And on top of it, you have no Antonio Brown. If we go out there and if we look at Tom Brady in games with no Antonio Brown, this is a man that instead of averaging 313 passing yards per game, he goes down to 290. Same thing with Rob Gronkowski. With the past 2 years with Gronk, you got 304 passing yards per game. Without Gronk, 280. And if you look at the splits with and without Rob Gronkowski in New England, going to be very comparable as well. Brady is a completely different quarterback with and without Rob Gronkowski on the field. If we go a little bit deeper into this, we'll see that Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski were first and second in Tampa in yards per route run this past year. They're both some of the best football players of all time, and they were still some of the best football players in Tampa last season. I don't even want to mention that Tom Brady is 45 years old because, of course, if you've ever brought up Tom Brady's age at any point of his NFL career over the past decade, you could have said since Tom Brady was 35 that he's getting there and he's going to be too old. You could have said that for 10 years straight and you would have been called a clown, which you probably were. But I will just bring it up. I will just say he's 45. More importantly, I'm worried about Bruce Arians, Rob Gronkowski, Antonio Brown being gone. So despite Brady leading the NFL in passing yards last year, despite Brady last season being the quarterback 3 on a points per game basis, I'm going to move him down. I'm not drafting Tom Brady very often. And now our QB 12 is going to be a tier below. We have someone else with them. Thomas, can you throw up a little question mark on that other guy? We'll maybe get to him in another video. But Matthew Stafford is going to be our next player. With Stafford, very safe bet, high floor, low ceiling just because he's not going to have rushing production. But hell, you can make the argument that possibly the situation's better with Allen Robinson instead of Robert Woods. Now, y'all know I'm not a massive fan of Allen Robinson by any means, but what I can say is oh, well, if Sean McVay decided to go ahead, trade Robert Woods for legitimately nothing, just dump Robert Woods on the Tennessee Titans, get rid of his contract to then pay Allen Robinson $30 million guaranteed. Sean McVay probably thinks Allen Robinson's an upgrade. We probably should as well. Stafford, high floor player, low ceiling player. I would say in like a best ball format where you're going to draft multiple quarterbacks, I'm fine taking Stafford. In your weekly managed league, I honestly probably wouldn't even want to take Stafford. Like, I probably wouldn't really want to take anybody outside of those top 11 options because I think you would be reaching on Stafford. I think you'd be reaching on Rodgers, reaching on Carr compared to possibly streaming the position and just getting guys for completely free. So it's very important, in my opinion, that you grab one of those top 11 quarterbacks this year. I think that's where you're going to see the drop off. Maybe I could even move Brady and Dak down a tier below. But regardless, thank you so much for being a part of the flock supporting the channel. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go down there, drop that like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you want to hop in a draft with us at any time, we are drafting on Underdog Fantasy every single day. I'm sure y'all have seen a million streams about it. And go sign up with promo code FLOCK. You'll get our 2022 fantasy football draft guide with just a $10 deposit, and they'll match your deposit. So it's essentially free for you, and you can have some fun in fantasy drafts. But thank you again. I appreciate y'all. Hope you have a great day. Hope you get to see you with the video tomorrow.